We're going to begin the programme here in France, where President Emmanuel Macron is continuing his hunt for a new prime minister today. He's set to hold talks with leaders from his own centrist bloc, as well as the Socialist Party and the right-wing Republicans. Finding Michel Barnier's replacement is a task that the French president said Thursday would be completed in the coming days. In a defiant televised address, Macron ruled out stepping down, despite growing calls from opposition leaders for him to do so, blaming the fall of Barnier's government on, quote, anti-Republican politicians. Emily Boyle has more on that speech.
In his first allocution since the fall of his government on Wednesday, Macron announced he would be naming a prime minister in the next few days.
In the next few days, I will appoint a prime minister. I will instruct him to form a government of general interest representing all the political forces of a government that can participate in it, or at least undertake not to censor it.
Michel Barnier was forced to hand in his resignation and that of his government after the motion of no confidence passed by 331 votes. Barnier had been in the role 3 months, the shortest tenure of any prime minister in modern French history. The president, who looked significantly weaker after the motion of no confidence, came out defiant. He assured his critics he would not be stepping down.
The mandate that you democratically gave me is a mandate of 5 years, and I will remain in office until the end of that term.
Macron lashed out at what he called an anti-Republican front, which was not working in the interests of the French people.
I will never assume the irresponsibility of others, especially of members of parliament who choose to bring down France's budget and government only a few days before the Christmas holidays.
Macron now faces a difficult task to come up with a prime minister capable of leading a minority government in a parliament where no party holds a majority. The president said that the first priority for this new prime minister will be to come up with a budget in January. For the time being, the 2024 budget will roll over to next year.
We're going to talk more about the political turmoil here in France and speak to Paul Smith, who is an associate professor in French and Francophone studies at the University of Nottingham. Great to have you, Paul. So Macron has hinted a little bit at taking responsibility for what's happened, but he's mostly blamed the fall of Michel Barnier's government on this so-called anti-Republican front. Is that really the case? Should Macron be taking more blame here?
I think he's assuming, as he said, he takes blame for the original mistake, or what he said last night was that people hadn't understood his dissolution back in June, and I'm not sure I understand it still to this day. Why would the French have to understand his thought behind that? But I think that that's really his attempt to recenter in a fairly ham-fisted way, I have to say, a very clumsy way, trying to recenter the government and open negotiations with the centre-left. Whether they respond positively or not, we'll see this morning when their leaders go to meet with Macron at the Elysee. But I actually thought the speech itself, the tenor of the speech was not a good one, and was quite glad it only lasted 10 minutes because you just felt that he was going to keep digging a hole for himself.
Well, Macron also very much ruled out the idea of him stepping down, despite the mounting pressure on him to do so. He says he's going to stay on until 2027. Do you think he should step down?
No, I don't. I don't see any reason constitutionally for that to happen. And that would just create, if he did step down, it would create an even bigger crisis. There are only 2 parties in France that would be ready for a presidential election, and that would be La France Insoumise and the National Rally. The other parties are absolutely not prepared. And that really would be, he talked about this anti-Republican front, meaning La France Insoumise on one side and the National Rally on the other. That would absolutely be handing things over to them, the prospect of a presidential election at this point, irrespective of what the opinion polls are telling us, would be absolutely catastrophic for France.
And Paul, you mentioned there that Macron is going to be continuing talks with political leaders today. It's aimed at forging an agreement on finding some sort of new prime minister to take over from Barnier. How do you think the talks will go? Will they be able to find a consensus?
It's really very difficult because you've got to find, first of all, you have to find a candidate that can reach across the divide. That's the really big problem at the moment. There are 1 or 2 names that have been circulating, but it's very difficult to see somebody, let's say, on the centre right who could reach across to the left. there might be some centre-left candidates who might be willing to reach across to the right. One, I suppose, encouraging thing is that Laurent Wauquiez, the leader of Les Républicains in the National Assembly, has said that his group will not censure another government. They're using this whole idea of the motion of no confidence as a bar, if you like, a benchmark. But at the moment, it's not. And the speech last night was not really meant, I don't think, to placate the centre left. So it's very difficult to see exactly who would be the kind of people have used the idea of the national union government sort of sitting in the middle of French politics. It's difficult to see at this moment in time who would lead that.
So there are no names, there have been some names that have been floated around, but
Yes.
you have any names that you would think perhaps could take over?
Yeah, the defence minister, Sébastien Lecornu, has been mentioned, but but the problem there is that he's being mentioned because he has the favour of the National Rally. Well, the problem with governing with the kind of tacit agreement of the National Rally of Le Pen and company is that, it's like Aesop's fable of the scorpion and the frog. The scorpion in the end will sting the frog and drown with the frog when you cross the river, because that's in its nature. It needs to be somebody who is much more in the centre and has a reputation, who has a good reputation with the parties of the left, who might reach out and bring on board, if it's at all possible, the socialists, or at least, as Emily said and as Macron himself said, at least parties that won't automatically push the censure button, because otherwise we just get into a continual kind of spiral of governments appointed and then votes of no confidence, and so it goes.
And away from the candidates that could possibly take over from Barnier, Macron also in that speech yesterday mentioned this special law that will be tabled to Parliament this month, that in order to allow public services to continue without a working budget. Give us a sense of what kind of impact you think this new law will have.
Well, this new law will indeed will simply sort of tide France over. In fact, it's possible for Parliament, once there is a government in place, it's possible to first of all to have this special law that will tide us over, will tide the French over, but then actually Parliament has until June to put in place a permanent budget for 2025. It's not although these things have never happened or haven't happened in the recent past, the French system is prepared for it. So there'll be a special law which can be as temporary or as long-lasting as it needs to be to cover the period. And then come the new year, come January and afterwards, then a new bill could be brought by a new government, and that would kind of set things up. So although we're carrying forward the tax criteria, the pensions criteria that we had for 2024, and some people will win, some people will lose, and because there are aspects of what the Barnier government have put in place that were going to help French agriculture, those things aren't going to come into place. Nevertheless, they can do. It's not the end of the story with regard to a budget, but at least it tides France over for the time being.
Paul, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for giving us your insight there. That's Paul Smith, who is an associate professor in French and Francophone studies at the University of Nottingham. Thanks so much.